we're going to look, if it's okay with you, at motivation and leadership in the context of the one-to-one. I mean, the one-to-one is something that many people do not like. You may be an exception, but there are a lot of managers who dislike and tend to shy away from the one-to-one. And worse, there are many of us who tend to let the one-to-one slip, which obviously can be very, very demotivating for an individual. Imagine if you've got a one-to-one with your boss, and perhaps once or twice or three times you have dates but they slip and maybe it just gets put off at the last minute. That's not terribly motivating for you, and the fact is if we do that to other people, that's not motivating either. So the first thing is, if we're going to have one-to-one, is to be realistic about the diary, set a space aside and keep to it. And obviously if you have to let that go for any reason, try and get a face-to-face in as soon as possible, make the apologies and be definite about making it the next time. And then of course you must stick to that appointment the second time round. There's quite a lot more. We won't deal with everything around the one-to-one, but perhaps some of the basics we've covered. I think to some extent that we need to be consistent and reliable in actually turning up and being there for the one-to-one. And the question we might want to ask ourselves is, well, how motivating was that? Well, we can guess, but the real answer to that question is to ask the individual that you've been running the one-to-one for. And if you think about this another way, in terms of your one-to-one with your boss, you might want to tell them the answer to this question as well. And that question is, so if your motivation was X when you came into the room for the one-to-one, and here we are at the finish, what's your motivation like now? So if you're going to ask your boss that, they hadn't asked the question, say, look, can I just share with you how I'm feeling about this particular session? When I came in, my sort of motivation was about 4, and now it's about 6, or whatever it is. If it's the other way around, it might be a start of a useful and productive conversation. But in terms of you managing, very useful question to be asking towards the end of the session, just to check in and get if you like, a calibration from them about where they are in terms of their motivation. And look and listen very carefully, make sure it seems to be an authentic answer, particularly if they're scoring up. And if they are scoring down, what's the question? Well, probably something like, so what is it that we could perhaps do together to turn this around? And you might want to look into, is it about the quality of the relationship between the two of you? Or is it about pay? Is it about rewards, recognition? What is it? And where are you influencing? Or how can you influence those things? Before you even get to the one-to-one, I think some people just crash straight in. Let's business-like, perhaps not look at them, not make eye contact, and just crash in and say, oh, well, here's here's the one-to-one, you've had a look through, I've seen your comments, and get through it as quickly as possible. Probably better for most of the people, most of the time, to be maybe have a little bit of social inquiry, how things are going, maybe share something as well that's relevant to yourself with them, so there's more of a sharing going on. Or open questions like, so tell me, if you will, generally how things are going at the moment. So in other words, inviting a story, not, oh, it's okay. So you're inviting a story by leaving it fairly open, and but not just saying, oh, how are things going, which would just, oh, it's all right, but to extend that and say, well, why don't you tell me a little bit about? So you're saying you're asking for that story in order to get them settled, and with a bit of luck, listening better, so that you can have a better quality one-to-one. The test, of course, is very good. The other thing we haven't discussed, which I think is worth discussing, is the whole question of the mindset that you take into the one-to-one. And for those of you who have had and still have to have one-to-ones with staff who are, shall we say, difficult, I don't mean necessarily difficult, but we find them difficult, this might be particularly useful. The fact is that if we go into a meeting with anyone with a sense that our expectations are anxious, that it's not going to turn out very well, that it hasn't turned out well in the past, that we bring that baggage in with us. And at some level, the other individual is going to pick that up. Particularly if they're quite bright or manipulative, they'll be looking to click those little switches in your head and try and establish the sort of dysfunctional patterns that they've managed to trigger in you before. And that's not going to be true for everyone listening to this video, but it's certainly going to be true for a number of managers who have experienced this sort of manipulation. The bright employee who's using a whole range of different tactics to try and control a situation where they are, in theory, subordinate. So for mindset then, what we need to do is to be able to open our own mental box, to be able to have the thought that, well, perhaps it could be different. Perhaps if I ask more questions, perhaps if I change the space and make it a more equal space, I don't grab a space behind a desk, but I book a room or find a space where there are similar chairs in a similar situation, and invite the individual to take one of those chairs. In a sense, giving them, even the difficult people, choices over where they sit, giving them some control over the way in which the one-to-one discussion takes place, switching off the phones. All of those things can assist the individual really to feel that they've got control over their space, to feel more confident, with a bit of luck to open up and be more honest with you. Now there's another side to that, of course, and that's, as we've raised honesty, and that's about your own honesty. One of the reasons that lots of managers hate one-to-ones, and I mean hate, is because they know they can't deal with particular issues. They haven't got any flexibility over, let's say, salaries or recognition or reward, or they're fixed in some way by the structures of the organisation and budgets or whatever. So they know they can't do something. And they may have an idea from previous conversations that this individual wants more money, but we know they can't have it. In those circumstances, what would we do? Well, coming back to honesty I think is the best thing. So if you lay out and you say, right, this is the situation, I have to tell you right off, and you can be disappointed and I wouldn't blame you for this, but, I have a budgetary constraint, cannot do this, so we can talk about next year, we could talk about other ways in which you could progress, which might mean changing jobs or, within the organisation, but within your own role there isn't scope for this. So it's out there and it's honest. And then to allow them, if they need to express their disappointment, let them do it. Let them get it off their chest, so it can be part, so you can say, look, I'd love to help, I'd love to do something, but it's not in my ability to do that at the minute. How else can I serve you? How else can I help you? How else can I assist in your development and the way you're seen more broadly at work? How else can I do those things? In other words, becoming what I'd call the servant leader, the supporter of that individual to develop and have better well-being at work, but also, of course, to be more productive at work. Something else I'd like to mention is about something about the language. And one of the things I'd like to say about the language is it's this question of whether we say, and I don't know how conscious you are about this, what can I do about that? And sometimes we may hear ourselves or saying, well, what can we do about that? And just occasionally you may say, so what will you do about that? Or what can you do about that? Great coaching question. Now, there are very great differences, because I think if I can do, there are times when all of those are right. But if you say, what can I do about it, you're taking responsibility away from them. And that's not always the right thing to do. So we need to think about, if I say, what can I do about that? Is it wholly in my court? Is it wholly in my responsibility, in my influence to do something? In which case the phrase is the right one. What we don't want to be doing is mothering or parenting the individual, taking responsibility away from them. What we want to be doing is to get them more independent, taking more decisions, and being more in charge of their own development and their own influence at work on their own. And when we say, what can we do, that's a very good phrase to use sometimes to enlist, to show that support. but to be careful not to do it if it's an area where really what you're looking to do is to support them but your expectation is that they should be doing it as part of their development. Clear difference there between support and involvement in doing something and taking time and energy into something as a shared joint venture, as opposed to sitting back, being prepared to be a sounding board somewhere for perhaps advice or to ask coaching type questions in order to let them think outside the box and develop their thinking. But the we question, the we bit, needs to be thought of quite carefully, whether it is truly a joint venture or whether really what you're saying is, I'm here to support you. And last of all, what can you do about that? Clearly there are times when that is absolutely appropriate. We're looking for them to find solutions and to develop their thinking, and a whole series of questions around what they can do and further questions to develop and extend that can help individuals move on considerably in their thinking and in their productivity.